Hello, good evening and welcome. This is Biz1st in Focus. Our topic of discussion this evening is Trump. Well, not the US president, but his tax reforms that have quoted a lot of controversy at home and also overseas. Have they stoked fears in Asia and elsewhere? To discuss this and more, we're joined by Mr. Rohan Masakorala, a key policymaker in Sri Lanka and also CEO of the Shippers Academy, Colombo. Mr. Masakorala, we've seen that reduction in the corporate tax rate in the United States from 35% to 20%.
21%.
To 21%. What does this mean for the rest of the world, specifically for Asia and for Sri Lanka as well? Does this mean that companies that moved out of the US are going to start going back?
Well, it's targeted towards offshore US companies. Let's start from where you started. It's about a Trump policy of being America first and America-driven policy of the new president. So he sees that a lot of offshore companies are not bringing its profit back to America, because they are being parked in tax havens around the world. As a result, the American industries are not growing. As a result, the jobs are affected. That's what he thinks, and to some extent it's right. If you look at this kind of a policy where the corporate tax at the highest level, the rich are getting the benefit basically. The economists call is the trickle-down economic effect that will have for American economic growth. Now, the good side of the whole thing is at the moment also American economy is doing well. Very clearly numbers show that the economy is doing well. The Dow Jones has crossed 24,500 and the monthly jobs output is good, industrial output is good. I don't think all that credit should go to Mr. Trump. Mr. Obama did the hard work for 8 years since the collapse, and he set up the foundation for it to grow independent of political intervention. So this is the sad story of politics, I guess. Somebody puts the house in order and he has to go, and the next person starts enjoying the benefits of it. But on the other hand, the positive side is Mr. Trump being a businessman, he sees the value of tax, how it works in the corporate world. There are two sides of the argument also here, but what he says is that bringing down the corporate tax from 35% to 21% will bring in offshore American companies to move back inshore towards America. Because technically even at 35% American companies were paying about 22% tax.
But will that happen though? Because you may have brought it down from 35% to 22%, but companies that are parking their profits in tax havens, they have it there tax free. So even if it is 21% and an indicative rate of, like, let's say 10, or if minus the loopholes and this thing, if it comes down to about 10 or 15%, does that mean that those companies are going to take the money that's in a tax-free sort of tax haven and then bring it back? Because I mean, they still have to pay more. They'll be happy to stay where they are and to keep the status quo as it is.
Yeah, some are in the tax haven.
Because labor costs in America are also higher. So correct. Will they actually come back?
Well, this worked in the 80s when President Reagan.
But that's a less globalized world.
Less globalized time. It worked, and there were about 20 million new jobs created in America. I feel that there will be a partial move of some other investments going to America, because on one side, not only the tax haven, the American economy is starting to do well. So there will be certain industries that would like to be present inshore within America. The motor car industry and things like technological companies can afford to do that, and they may shift part of it. As you said, it's not going to do an overnight spillover effect to the rest of the world. But if you look at the global media, all the countries are concerned, because also America is interestingly increasing interest rates, and there are expected 4 interest rate hikes in the 2018 year, which means there's going to be a lot of pressure in the rest of us in Asia. The Asian economy increase interest rate. So all our macroeconomic current policies maybe have to be relooked, including the tax benefits. Even Singapore has a tax. I mean, there is a tax. China has certain amount of tax. Not all are tax havens. So it depends on what's the difference, what's the interest rate hikes, and all that are positive in America right now with the economic growth. So there will be the profits that are reinvested. Part of it will definitely move back to America for investment, because President Trump also wants to look at expanding infrastructure, the infrastructure projects in America. So it's a business case. You forget about building the wall, but rest of it, the roads and America's infrastructure is actually behind rest of the developing world, including
the developed world. Yeah.
Developed world, they are behind. So there are a lot of potential. So right now, even the Europeans and the Asians are all watching the impact of this, and markets are also quite positive in America. That means that the signals are that there will be some kind of move back to the American economy from offshore industries. It's not a bad thing, because on the other hand, for us, like in Sri Lanka, if the American economy starts growing, our exports have a good chance of entering this market in bigger numbers.
So if you look at it in that way, it's actually a good opportunity for us to boost our export earnings. Look at opportunities in the American market with the big American. If you see a movement of American companies back there, leading to, as sort of a multiplier effect there at home in America, that gives more, that leaves more consumers with more disposable income to spend on our coconut water and our tea and our apparel and our whatever else that you want to make and sell.
Yeah, that is the interesting part. We are now looking at a national export strategy right now, and it's almost done. America is a key market for us, although it's far away, but it's still a key market for apparels and some of the other products. And if American consumer is having more spending capacity, disposable income, for all exporters from Asia, it's a positive, because it was the America-led the collapse in 2008, which put ripple effects to the rest of the world. What we are just coming out of it now, and if on the other hand, the same story should be true. If America starts growing at 2-3%, the world's largest economy, right? Still, it starts going at a comfortable 2-3% growth.
As long as Mr. Trump doesn't put up all sorts of protections to stop our exports from going in there.
Yes.
On that note, I'd like to go in for a short commercial break. You can never really tell what he will do next. He's anything but, well, I suppose he's predictable in the sense that he will be unpredictable. When we come back, we'll be talking about the effect that these companies possibly moving out of Asia and the rest of the world will have on jobs. Welcome back to Biz1st in Focus. We're in conversation with Mr. Rohan Masakorala. We're talking about the new tax regime in the new corporate tax regime the new tax regime in the United States and its global effects. You mentioned how, in 2008 with the financial crisis, with the collapse of the big US banks, how it had a ripple effect all across the world, and how, that should be a flip side to it as well, is that, with the US economy sort of booming, that also should have a ripple effect. And I mentioned, that's as long as Mr. Trump's administration doesn't put up all sorts of protections and barriers to trade. And he has, in his sort of political speeches at least, taken a very strong anti-trade stance, leaving the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So in that sense, while there is a window of opportunity for Sri Lankan exporters to look at a growing American market, more customers, and sort of make best use of that opportunity, will that window close?
Well, for Sri Lanka, being such a tiny products that's going into the US market, I really don't see, unless there's political reasons for stopping our exports coming, I don't see that there's going to be a major interference in our products. I think President Trump has made serious allegations towards China and Russia and some of his targeted countries about unfair trade practices. But we are not in that category, so I still see, for us it's an opportunity. I also advocate that in 2001 the government of Sri Lanka tried to get some kind of a trade agreement with the United States. At that time I think it was nearly there during President Bush period. We should work towards some kind of a bilateral arrangement to get our exports more into the US, because I really don't see this global political situation getting very much affecting our exports to America. I only see an opportunity at this moment. We are at the moment very insignificant in terms of global trade to the United States. So if the consumer is getting richer and the products that we ship out of Sri Lanka are not major threats to America.
What's the status of sort of American companies that have invested in Sri Lanka? Is there, with this new tax policy, is there any risk of such companies moving stateside?
Unlikely. That companies that have invested here, the products that they do, the labor component that matters, they have looked at the labor component. So most of those labor components won't be matched. In fact, the labor component will be probably going higher if the American economy is growing. So it's about more high-tech and industrial major products that will have an impact, and that is what President Trump wants, the industrial sector to boom, not the products that we at the lower level of the ladder are supplying.
These are highly complex
products. So we may, as a country, middle-income country, may be able to attract new investments to Sri Lanka to compete with some new products that we can ship to America rather than manufacturing in places like China or in the far ASEAN region.
So who will this really affect? Where will you see, will there be a negative effect of this companies sort of moving stateside, and who will be affected by this?
Well, there will be some movement. There has to be some economic movement across it's very difficult, it's little too early to predict, but the overall large picture is that this is going to attract the profits and investments of offshore companies back into America, which means America will benefit and some of the other countries of those FDIs will probably be less beneficial in terms of investments. But today the globe is such, Asia is a very important component because it has a large population, 2/3 of the world's population is in this part of the world. So you cannot segmentize and say because of this the whole industry is going to collapse or anything, but markets will start slowly shifting and adjusting, because Asia will also have to looking at increasing interest rates, looking at their tax bases and reduce it further to retain some of the investments. So it's going to have, definitely it's going to have an effect. It's too early to call exactly what will happen, but I am looking at it in a positive sense, because I always believe if the big economy grows, that has a positive impact towards rest of the other big economies, which will have an overall economic impact, good economic impact to the world. Because if America fails, the rest of the economy also tends to go backwards.
But you're seeing sort of rising economic superpowers in China. China's ambitions to be a global or even the global economic superpower with its Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road, etc., promoting trade ties. The rest of the world too, the other members in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, have decided to go ahead without America. How big of a factor is America going to be going into the future?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're looking at 20, 30, 40 years, yes, rest of the economies are going to pick up. China, ASEAN itself is the 6th largest economy if you look at it as a region. Europe is going to start recovering probably next year onwards. European markets are also going to recover. So So it's good, it's healthy that all this grow and that they are not a one single person to depend on in the future. But we also must be cautious the fact that the largest economy should not fail. If that fails, it is tied up to many of these rest of the economies of the world. So we should not be dependent on America, but at the same time we should make sure that the biggest economy is also healthy. So it's good for the rest of us also, because we have a weak partner in a system anywhere, whether it is Europe or anybody. It's not good for free market and international trade. That's the bottom line. International trade would like to have many players who are doing well. If somebody is not creating job in one market, others starts creating market. So we need that diversification very much. And I still feel that America would lead the global economy for the next 2 decades. Beyond that, China will come up as the largest economy, I guess so.
On that note, I'd like to go in for a short commercial break, but you touched on a very important point there. We need that diversification. We can't be depending solely on the US or the UK or the EU as our main export markets. So we need to be growing that markets. And with a view towards doing that, the country is very close, I believe, to adopting a national export strategy. We'll have more on that as soon as we come back. Welcome back to Biz1st in Focus. We've been talking about the new tax policies of the United States of America that have been adopted by the Trump administration and the global impact that it could have. We're in conversation with Mr. Rohan Masakorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy. We've sort of reached an agreement of sorts that, while globally there will be some negative blowback in the form of, big US companies moving stateside, that for countries like Sri Lanka, lower middle income countries, this opens up a window of opportunity or even a door to boost export earnings through a growing American economy. We also spoke of the need for diversification, how our export markets are in dire need of diversification. There is this national export strategy that we've been hearing about. It's still being formulated. How far away are we from having that national export strategy and having it implemented?
Yeah, the export strategy itself is almost 95% done. End of this month, that's end of December or early January, it will be submitted to the Cabinet of Ministers for approval. And then if it is endorsed by the Cabinet, then it's action time. We have identified several key sectors, not the existing mature sectors. They will be anyway given the support. But we want to diversify Sri Lankan exports because we are considered a vulnerable economy, mainly because we are restricted to about 3 or 4 major export products. And today, if you look at the tea industry, we have problems. Coconut industry, we have problems. These are some of the key areas we do exports. And the garments, apparel industry. So we need to diversify, and the national export strategy talks of this diversification, and key sectors are identified so that Sri Lanka has better set of products offered to the world in terms of exports. We are also looking at not only the Sri Lankan exports.
So how will this national export strategy, so these areas that you've sort of identified, these sectors, these sectors of industry that you've identified as key growth areas that can have major export growth in the coming years, how will this national export strategy actually help them?
Well, it has the export strategy which was identified by the stakeholders itself who worked with the Export Development Board, and the International Trade Center is heading the whole operation. What we look at is here where our strengths lie in certain products. For example, say I work with the boat building industry. Sri Lanka has a very small, relatively a small, less than $100 million boat building industry. Now we want to take it to $500 million within the next 5 years. The potential is very high, but our regulations, the systems, all those are very backward. Even land, for example, if you want to have a boat launching location, the complications of to get for an investor to come and get a piece of land near the sea, the land bank is not there. So we have recommended all these structural changes as well as the legal reforms that is needed to bring these industries to Sri Lanka, because it's, if you look at, analyze the cost wise, Sri Lanka's labor cost and the skill levels are good for us to go into these areas. IT also one of the areas is what we have identified. Similarly, there is even wellness tourism now, that is export of service, right? That is also a sector identity. Spices and things are being given special emphasis like that. Plus logistics are like added services which we are looking at, because we are looking at the what's called the re-export business. Now Singapore, as being a hub, has a massive amount of re-exports. Billions of dollars are re-exported, value added. Now one of the strategies also is to make this commercial hub, logistics hub, a real possibility. So that is important for us to bring in cargo from the region and add value and re-export it. So all those are important components for us to look at and diversify our exports. Parallelly, government is also looking at opening up new markets for us with free trade agreements. That also is a positive factor for our companies to diversify.
Who are the stakeholders that have been consulted in the formulation of this national export strategy? Has it been a sort of a participatory process, or has it been an exclusively expert-driven or intellectual-driven process?
No, it has been a totally participative mechanism. It started in April this year, initiated by the Prime Minister. All the chambers were invited, and their stakeholders were taken into various subcommittees, working groups, about 5 consultative rounds, including not only in Colombo, but we went into regions, even to places like Jaffna, Galle, Hambantota. The regional chambers were consulted. People who are on the ground doing the business, they were asked what are the constraints they have, what are the opportunities they see. All those were compiled into each specific sector. So there were sector leaders. Now I was taken to handle boat building and logistics, 2 sectors which I overlooked. So we had the 100% current industry people who are exporting were the people who gave the input. They said this is strong, this is the way to go. So it's not ITC policy or EDB policy, it comes from the stakeholders. And we have gathered and had consensus presentations done and agreed upon with all of them what's going to come into the strategy. So now we are telling the policy makers, this is what the industry wants to grow this industry. That's how the export strategy is driven, and the best possible principles and ideas are also backed up by the experts from the ITC and the local industry to make it a reality. It's a very positive thing. I think my 25 years of being in the exports and shipping industry, I have not seen such a serious effort put in here to get a nice framework for us to work. Issue here is we need to implement it, and that is the responsibility of the government and the line of cabinet ministers to drive it.
The key obstacle to implementing any government strategy, policy, etc. will be the opposition that you're going to face to it. Have you looked at the possible contentious issues here that may cause opposition to arise?
In my areas, definitely I have not seen. I have seen kind of a united effort by everybody going towards this, because the areas we looked at is reforms. Only area that we have a problem is like the logistics area, where the liberalization issue has come. Other than that, everybody is kind of focused towards the reforms that we have suggested.
So there isn't one area that someone can pick on and then suddenly decide, look, we're not going to support this.
Well, as far as the stakeholders, all the chambers which we can reach to, and ideas that flew in from them have been taken into consideration. So always there will be some critique.
But you have different chambers have different sort of opinions, different ways of different perceptions or ways of looking at things. So you have, for example, the National Chamber of Commerce, which looks at a more, dare I say, inward almost. So you're confident of support from across these various sort of stakeholders?
We are confident because we are looking at outward and dollar related economy, and basically most of the members who came for these consultations are either members of all these chambers or some chambers, and nobody's input has been dropped off.
It's all being considered.
It's been considered and discussed in length whether it is the best one, whether it should be a priority A, B, C also has been discussed. We have given a priority, we have given implementation dates, we have given the ministries across the board that have to be involved in a particular change.
The line ministries and the
not one, but the key ministry plus, because Sri Lanka has so many ministries. So we identified all that. So we have given the strategy. It's a strategy document.
But the trick is going to be in the implementation. Mr. Masakorala, 95% done, 5% more to go.
Yes.
I wish you all the best. I hope that given the sort of sorry state that that exports are in at present, that this will be taken up as a national priority next year, and that the implementation will be swift and decisive as well. I wish you all the best once again. As we've constantly said on this show, when it came to the blue-green budget, Vision 2025, we're going to see the President's Vision 2030 coming up next month. The trick is going to be in the implementation. You can tell a joke as much as you want, you can tell it as well as you like, but if you mess up the punchline, you're not going to get any laughs. That's our show for tonight. We'll see you again, same time, same place next week.